The government has a responsibility to confront housing insecurity, ensure access to homes, and eliminate housing discrimination. Strengthening the lives of both individuals and communities through access to housing is essential. That's according to Adrianne Todman. She's the Deputy Secretary of the Department of Housing and Urban Development. Welcome to the program.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
All right, so let's talk about homelessness. The latest numbers we have are from HUD's 2020 report. And there are over 580,000 Americans who have experienced at least one night of homelessness in 2020. That's up from 2019, 2.2%. Why is that number increasing?
No, thank you for that question. And it's a really critical one and important to HUD. Our mission is very broad, and we help families who are experiencing homelessness, and we help families who are graduating all the way up to home ownership. What we found is happening inside of the homelessness space is many families are really being impacted by the current economic environment. And the idea of a homeless person is different than what we probably thought it was years ago. We have teachers, sadly, who cannot afford their neighborhoods and are living in their cars. We have moms with their children who may have been evicted and are trying to find a safe place to be. So we find that there's a number of different reasons that individuals and families are entering the homeless shelter system, and what HUD is doing is working with our local partners to do everything we can to provide housing so these homeless individuals can enter apartments.
And how has the pandemic impacted the homeless community and increasing those numbers?
Thank you. So, our 2021 report will be coming out shortly, and we will see that the pandemic had an impact both in terms of the count, but also in terms of what's happening with families. What we saw was during the pandemic, a lot of people lost their jobs. A lot of folks in the service industry, we know a lot of folks were concerned about evictions. A lot of folks were concerned about losing their homes. And I will say I'm very proud of the fact that the federal government apparatus did everything that we could do and continue to keep families inside of their homes. So what we're hoping to see when the point in time count happens this year is some of those measures worked. We worked with Department of Treasury in terms of folks who are renters and deploying our rental assistance funds. And HUD has a fair amount of homeowners who rely on HUD for their mortgage insurance. And we did everything we could to work with servicers to make sure those families did not default and also stayed in their homes.
Now, what about the funds from the American Rescue Plan? How was that used, and what impact have you been seeing from those funds?
Sure. So the President's American Rescue Plan afforded us the opportunity to help get tens of thousands of people into apartments. And we are using a program that's called the Emergency Housing Voucher program. And we are working with two of our local partners, our housing authorities, but also our continuums of care, which are generally nonprofits who identify the most vulnerable homeless to be housed. So that money was deployed mid last year, and we're pleased right now to see that people are being leased up and entering their apartments. There's much more work to be done, of course, but we're really pleased to see the emergency housing vouchers doing their job.
So the numbers from 2020 indicate that veteran homelessness did not go down from 2019. Why is that, and how are you working with the VA to address that problem?
Right. Veterans Affairs is one of our strongest partners in helping decrease homelessness across the country, specifically with our veteran neighbors. And that program is targeted toward veterans who are homeless, but also in need of some services to make sure that they're living with integrity. One of the things we're really proud of is through that partnership with the VA, we have been able to decrease veterans' homelessness by more than 50% over the past 10 years. Of course, there's always room for improvement, and we are working very closely with the Secretary McDonough and his team to make that happen. In fact, Secretary McDonough and Secretary Fudge are the co-chairs of an interagency council on homelessness, and one of our target populations are our veterans. I mean, if you've served your country, all right, the least that we can do is make sure you have a shelter over your head, and we're working very closely with the VA.
There's something called the HUD Voucher program. Tell me about that and how is that managed?
Certainly. The Voucher is a jewel of a program, and we work very closely with, again, as I said, the VA and their medical centers. And how that program works is that it's really a localized program. HUD provides funding to local housing authorities, and the VA medical centers provide the names of veterans who need to be housed and also provide wraparound services to those veterans. I mean, we know sometimes everybody needs a little bit of help. And so with HUD providing the housing through its local partners and the VA providing services, we've been able to help just thousands and thousands of veterans across the country, and we continue to.
The people of color are significantly overrepresented among the homeless population. What are you doing at HUD to address that specifically?
Absolutely. Tackling homelessness is also tackling racial injustice. We know that many of our brothers and sisters on the street are people of color, and we've been very intentional in terms of how we are looking at our program design, particularly as we're looking at future funds. We want to make sure that those vouchers and our housing opportunities are going to people of color and other folks who have the highest need.
And I want to talk to you about foster care children,
Yes.
because as they age out, when they turn 18, all of a sudden they're completely cut off, and a lot of them end up homeless. What are you doing about that?
This is a great question for a tough issue. Imagine being 18, 19, 20, 21 years old and being told, guess what? You have to leave your home. You have to find a new home. You have to find a way to support yourself. I mean, I know several of us at that age would not be able to do that. And so HUD, again, working with our local partners, created a new program called Foster Youth to Independence. And what we are doing is working with our local communities and saying, please identify some of these young adults that need a little help just getting started. We don't want to have young adults on the street as they begin to really thrive and when it's supposed to be some of the most critical years of their life. So we have a voucher program, and we delivered about $14 million to localities just last year, a voucher program that will be provided to foster youth as identified by local agencies, and they're able to get rental assistance to find an apartment. And then we partner with other local nonprofits to make sure that they have furniture, to make sure that they have opportunities for job development. I mean, this is the right thing to do. And I can't think of any better way for us to spend our resources than helping young people get a leg up.
Because when they don't have someplace to stay, they can't be in school, they can't have a job.
Absolutely.
It just spirals.
Absolutely.
Well, so it's one thing to get people into a home, it's another to sustain them and keep them housed. Mm-hmm. What about that issue? Yeah,
this is something that I've been working on also throughout my life, and happy to be able to do it as HUD's Deputy Secretary. You're absolutely right. We can get families into a home, but it is almost as critical to get families to have a successful tenancy, to be able to stay in their units. And we do that a number of ways. Working with both public and private landlords, we try to identify those families that need some help. HUD does not necessarily deploy some of those funds. We do have a new Eviction Prevention program, which takes a different tactic to keeping families housed. But in terms of trying to identify issues before they become a real issue, we really, really rely on our partners at HHS. We rely on some of our partners at the local government leadership and nonprofits to do that. In fact, not too long ago, HUD and HHS partnered up and created a new portal which is providing information not just about housing resources, but also about human service resources that HHS deploys. I think it's a great partnership.
What about housing discrimination? What programs do you have in place for that problem?
So the Fair Housing Act is the law of the land. And our Secretary Fudge has made it clear that our enforcement of that act will not be passive. And it'll be intentional and it will be active. And there are a number of different things that we've been doing under her leadership. HUD inspired the concept of taking a look at appraisal bias. And we saw that if you are in a neighborhood that's predominantly people of color, homes are appraised at 20% less than when it is a home in a white neighborhood. And this administration said, we can't have that. We've got to do something about it. So Secretary Fudge, along with Ambassador Rice, who is the chair of the Domestic Policy Council, are the co-chairs of an appraisal task force to take a look at this issue, to understand how deep this problem goes, to look at perhaps some of the generational wealth that has been lost, to see if there's enforcement we need to do and some customer education. So we're looking forward to putting out a report early this year.
So what recourse does someone have if they feel like they've been discriminated against in the housing sector?
Well, certainly go to HUD's website, hud.gov. We have a portal way for you to explain to us what happened or to share your story. We, in addition to HUD taking a look at cases, we also have the FIP and FAP, it's so HUD geek, but the FIP and FAP programs, which we provide funds to nonprofits and local governments to also pursue where there's been discrimination. But certainly go to our website.
And tell me a little bit more about how HUD works with the private homeowners and the public housing system, and how does that all work together?
Sure. So generally, what HUD will do is, we are the enforcer, but we also provide funds to make sure that other entities can help get the right thing done. And we're also a compliance entity, but we rely on our partners. We're only as good as our local governments, our housing agencies, our state partners. And so when it comes specifically to fair housing claims, we will first defer to our local partners to pursue those cases, but HUD has its own investigators as well, and we get that job done.
I want to ask you about environmental justice. It's a big priority for the Biden White House.
That's correct.
Explain what that is first.
Certainly. So we're very proud that just last November, HUD released its climate action plan as part of COP26. And our plan takes a look at our work in climate change space in 3 different areas. One, doing our part to try to make sure that we are slowing down the warming of the earth, given greenhouse emissions. Second, we are seeing the impact of the damage that's been done so far. We're seeing climate changes, and we're seeing disasters in areas and times of the year that are, unusual. We're seeing the frequency and severity of hurricanes in a way that we have not. We're seeing tornadoes, times of the year that they typically don't happen. And so the second part of our climate action plan really focuses in how do we build in a resilient way and a sustainable way after a disaster has occurred. And we work very closely with our partners at FEMA. The third is on environmental justice. We know that when these disasters strike, it is disproportionately hurting people of color, either because they can't leave, they have no place to go, the resources by which to leave. And many times we see renters are the folks who are, the ones most impacted in terms of having a place to live. And so we want to make sure that our disaster recovery work is focused on folks who have high need, but we also want to make sure that if we are going to build a greener economy and a better, more resilient place for our kids and grandkids, and there's new jobs available, that those jobs are available to people who need it as well.
Adrianne, we were talking about environmental justice, and I wonder if you could give me an example of a community, a disadvantaged community that has been disproportionately affected by the effects of climate.
Sure, absolutely. I'll give you 2 examples. So I was recently in New Jersey visiting with some of our public housing residents, I won't name the town, but who were impacted by Hurricane Ida. And it was very sad to see how concerned they were about not just the fact that they were displaced, but that they were really afraid of coming back. And they kept saying to me, Ms. Todman, is there going to be another flood? Are we going to have to be displaced again? And so, one of the things that we have a responsibility to do is to, when we do have these natural disasters that occur, is to build back in the right way, in a smart way, and to really do as much as we can to just squash the fears of some of the low-income residents who are most impacted, and some of them are still trying to find another place to live beyond the hotel that they're in. Another example, which was an impact of Hurricane Ida as well, was a Native American tribe in Louisiana whose home was completely underwater for some time, and we've been working very closely with the state and with the town that abuts the tribe's land to help them find some place to live. So you can see that these are 2 populations, low income, living in areas that were disproportionately impacted, and HUD working with FEMA and others are trying to make sure that they're okay.
There was, of course, the deadly tornadoes across Kentucky and the neighboring states. It left many people homeless. HUD is involved in helping those people find homes. What progress have you made so far?
Sure. Well, certainly FEMA is always first in, and they make sure that areas are receiving the immediate recovery need that they have. HUD receives funding through something called the CDBG Disaster Recovery Funds. And when we receive those funds, we work with the localities on a housing plan. But we also work with FEMA prior to receiving those funds to help some of the individuals and families who were impacted to find new homes. And we're very fortunate to have a number of local partners, again, our housing agencies, that provide vouchers, that provide access to public housing units and other assisted units for individuals who can't afford to, just go at it on their own. And when we do receive our disaster recovery funds, we work in concert with the localities and the states to make sure that when they are building back, that they're building back in a more resilient way.
There was, of course, the wildfires in Colorado recently. Are you working in that area and helping those people that have lost their homes?
Yeah. So we, our HUD team was on the ground right after those wildfires occurred, and it was terrible. And we spoke with the FEMA administrator. We also are participating in a housing task force to make sure that we're providing all of the intelligence and wisdom we have in terms of helping families who are really in a restricted market, given the high cost of housing that's there. We're also in Kentucky with the tornadoes that happened, and there we did have a couple sites that were destroyed by the tornadoes, and we are also working with the families there to get them rehoused. And so, I always say to the team, recovering after a disaster is a marathon sometimes. We know we need to treat families with respect and with dignity, and we need to do everything we can, an all-government approach actually, to make sure that communities come back in a better way.
Well, speaking of all government, you mentioned so many different agencies that you're working with. How are you coordinating across so many agencies and so many initiatives?
Right. It's the love of the work, right? It's the love of governance. And so we have very strong partnerships, like I mentioned, with HHS. We work, lock and step every day with our friends in the VA on our housing voucher program. We work very closely with Treasury. When Treasury received billions of dollars to deploy to receive rental assistance, they leaned on HUD and our expertise to help them get those programs formatted. And we're also providing technical assistance at their behest for communities that need that help. So, thankfully we have an amazing 7,500 labor force at HUD, and we continue to work with our government agency partners every day.
I just want to ask you personally, because you were born and raised in the U.S. Virgin Islands, why a career in public service? What brought you to D.C. when you have such nice beaches over there?
We do, and if you've not been there, go. When I first went to college, I thought I was going to be a psychology major, and I took probably Gov 101 or American Government, one of these classes, and I realized, wow, this is fascinating. But even more than that, I took my first trip to Washington, D.C. as an 11th grader in high school and caught what they say is Potomac fever, and knew I had to be here. And so went off to college, came back to Washington, D.C., and never looked back. I mean, public service is an honor and a privilege, and I just relish being able to help people.
Well, we appreciate your service, and we appreciate you being here. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mimi.